Good evening and welcome to the February 19th, 2018 meeting of the Merrimack School Board. If you could please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item number 2 is public participation. Anyone from the public that would like to speak, please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. If you are a student, just please state your first name and your grade. Public participation is open.
Liam Nguyen, junior class, and what else do I say?
You covered it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the school board, just give me your next few minutes to let me explain to you why the homework policy as it is now is perfectly fine. So the main argument against it is that since they don't do the homework, they're not prepared enough to do the quizzes or tests, so they fail them, and they blame because the school doesn't enforce it. They're the ones who fail it. But when they get to college doesn't hold your hand. And that's why a huge percentage of freshmen in the first semester drop out, because they fail the big exams and the projects. And high school is made for you to prepare for college, and if you don't learn the techniques and just the habits of studying on yourself, then practically you're just screwed for the rest of your life. And if you can't grow a backbone and study on yourself, then mate, you can't get through college. And that's what most people I know in my personal life, that most people want to go to college after high school. So I just want them to learn how to study by yourself and to succeed in their future. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam.
Okay, so I actually have two different things to say. The first one, I'm going to be reading an episode.
First name and grade, please.
Oh, sorry. Chris Frank. I'm a junior at Merrimack High. So the first segment here is a excerpt from what a friend of mine wrote in regards to the school board policy. Her name's Devin Mitchell. She is also a junior. To whom it may concern, I am writing on the topic of the new homework policy that has been implemented this school year at Merrimack High. I am a junior at the high school this year, and honestly, I feel robbed of success. I have always been a responsible student. I take care of my work and get good grades. My freshman year, a teacher told my parents I was one of her most responsible students, and I never once missed a homework assignment. My sophomore year, the same was said during parent-teacher conferences. My parents were always pleased with the feedback they got on my attentiveness to my education and my schoolwork. Throughout my freshman and sophomore years, I consistently was an honor student. I had all A's and B's. And in the beginning of this year, I was accepted into the National Honor Society. In person and on paper, I was an excellent student. Then this year, there was a new homework policy that was put into place. I found my grades dropping, especially in the classes I wasn't as strong in, such as math. Not every student has a brain that can solve equations perfectly in their head in less than 30 seconds. Some of us require more time and attention. Even though a student may practice and work hard, their test grades may say something entirely different. That has been the case for me. Since 7th grade, I have had high B's and high A's. I've had high B's and high A's in my math classes. I worked hard and did my homework. If it didn't go great on a test, it was okay because my hard work was displayed in my homework grade. Now this year, I don't have that buffer. My grade went from an A to a C in just 1 year, and I've never been more stressed in my life. This will be the year That stains my high school transcript. Colleges will see that grade and they may pick a student from a homework policy. Okay, I'm going to skip that. May have just as many qualifications and just as much intelligence, but nothing can erase the permanent mark this policy has left. I ask you, did you ask students what they thought of this before you enacted it? I would have turned down the outrageous idea that all students K through 12 would no longer be graded on their homework. I am extremely discouraged, but I hope you take careful consideration in what I have said, and I hope students for years to come will not be in the same position I am today. Sincerely, Devin Mitchell.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak under public participation? Absolutely.
My name is Marin, and I am a junior as well. So good evening. I am speaking in favor of the homework policy. As someone who has taken a lot of higher level classes throughout high school, freshman and sophomore year, I was definitely hit with a very large workload of homework, and I often found myself at 1 or 2 a.m. trying to prioritize my homework based on whatever combination was the least amount of points I was going to lose the next day. So for me, the homework policy has really been a positive change. Not only have I been able to go home after school and have free time to, work on my college art portfolio or do after-school activities, but I also have experienced a lot less school and homework-related anxiety in the past 6 months-ish than I had ever before in high school. And additionally, I can show that solid grades can be achieved without the homework buffer, because last quarter was the first time ever for me in high school that I got straight A's because of the homework policy. So, but the experiences, positive experiences don't just apply to me. I'm going to read a portion of a well-worded message that was actually sent by a fellow student who was going to be here tonight but couldn't make it, sent to the high school's administration. If a student feels she or he needs to improve their knowledge of a topic before a test, he or she will make time to study for it, or do homework related to the topic. If the student is confident in their grasp of the material, however, he or she should not be required to complete it. Many students have several different commitments outside of school, and they will generally only make time to study if they feel they need to. Studying and note-taking aren't graded directly, so why should homework? Lastly, I just want to voice my opinion on the future of this policy. I believe that this policy puts a lot more responsibility on students to, study for the tests and make sure that they know their material. And I think that this policy, at least at the high school level, definitely strengthens the model where middle school prepares you for high school and high school prepares you for college. I believe that at this point in time, it is too soon to completely repeal the policy, because it's only been in place for about a semester, and an adjustment time should be considered for students who maybe aren't as used to the idea of not having homework. But I also believe that there's room for improvement, because there are a lot of students who are unhappy. I think possibly a policy where assigned homework can be graded for completion. However, if the student chooses not to do the homework, their grade should not be punished. This version has been implemented by a lot of teachers in the high school, where if you do the homework, it will help you, but if you don't, it won't hurt you. So I hope you take my words into consideration, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marin. Is there anyone else that would like to speak under public participation? We're going to clear the room, which is 4 people, but thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Well, I am shocked that I'm the only person here. So my name is Jenna Hardy. I'm the parent of 4 children that are currently...
Address we were going to need as well for you, because you're...
Oh, address, 59 Peasley Road.
Thank you, Jenna.
Yeah. So I have 4 kids in the Merrimack School District. I also grew up in the Merrimack School District. Actually, Mrs. Shaffrey was my principal when I went to Reedsbury School back. My maiden name is Coakley, so you might remember me from. And all my sisters. But I've lived here forever. And in the last few days, as all of us, we've all been having this school shooting safety consideration on our mind. I have seen Merrimack be proactive in that regard over the years in various different ways. I remember the time when we didn't have the double door situation where you had to walk through. So I have seen progress in that. My question is, as a concerned parent, I am not an angry concerned parent. I'm a parent who wants to see the threat and be realistic about what the threat is and about what we can do. We can't change laws. We can't change the facts of the situation of the day. What I would like to know as a parent is, what can we do as a school district? And when I say we, I mean me. I am committed to doing what I can on my end to help drum up support, do whatever I can do. What can we do to make our schools safer? Do we have a safety? I don't even think I really know. Do we have a plan? Do we have people that review it? Do we have security experts that come in and evaluate threats? Do we have, I just want to be an informed parent as I advocate for my kids and the safety of kids that I love in this town that aren't mine, for their safety in school. And I think I want to be one of those educated parents that talks about what's really happening, and I want to know what we do now and what we are looking to do in the future.
Thank you. A couple housekeeping items. So in public participation, we take testimony from the public, which we have done tonight. I know in light of recent events, I asked if we could respond. We've gotten some correspondence as a board as well. So in comments, we'll just be giving a very brief statement on work being done, so that will be coming later in the meeting tonight. But unfortunately, we're not able to dialogue on this issue at this time. Okay. But it will be addressed later in the meeting.
Okay, great.
Thank you. And since we ran out of public, I will close public participation. But still, this is. Oh, if you can come back, absolutely, you're more than welcome. Oh, this is his. Okay. Did a buffer so we would know the difference. Good. Okay.
First off, before I go on my tangent, name Chris Frank Jr. What Marin said at the end, many students have agreed on her point that if they change the student homework policy to where if you did get credit for doing homework and if you didn't do it, you wouldn't get credit, but it wouldn't be taken against you, I think that'd be much more agreeable, just so you know that the work you put in will be rewarded. Because I feel like, in general, many students, especially underclassmen, without incentive, we're not really doing anything. I mean, asking us to take that initiative, I don't think some of us are ready for that step. Though obviously, there's a degree of responsibility on students. So this year, it was a bit of a shock heading into the school year and hearing about the new homework policy. The biggest thing I have with this is the implementation. So last year about this time, we had to choose what courses we would take. And as someone who has maybe a fourth grade understanding of science and is particularly bad at algebra, I knew junior year would be particularly difficult. I was planning on taking AP US History, which I am, and we got recommendations from my guidance counselor that I should take CP Math, I should take CP Science because colleges appreciate that more. I was under the illusion that we would have that homework buffer, which, believe me, it's huge. It's not 2 or 3%. It honestly can be up to 10%. It's what keeps me in the past in the C range, which is acceptable, at least to me. Others, maybe not so much. This year without that, I did not do so hot. I have had to drop out of said classes and go into different fields of study, and that did not look well in my GPA. I had a 3.6, I believe, weighted GPA heading into this year. Now I have a 3.3. And when you look at it, this can really cost people scholarship opportunities. There's the potential that students are losing thousands of dollars in part due to this new student policy. And as far as the general effectiveness goes, I mean, if you look at what teachers are doing in class, there's a lot of transparency. A lot of people have reported that teachers, for instance, will give a student a piece of paper with a minute left in class and label it as classwork because they gave you a minute to work on it. It's due the next day. So I don't know how much extent teachers are following this rule. It's second semester, and there's times in some of my classes I don't know what is homework, what's not, what's classwork. and it's altogether very confusing, and I feel it could be much more efficient. And I mean, I understand trying to find creative solutions to the problems that face us. I researched. America ranked 17th out of 40 industrialized countries in terms of educational performance. So I want to ask a serious question. Do you know the way? Do we have a pathway to an improvement of the American education system? I just don't feel this is it. I do feel there's room for improvement. I love Marin's idea. I just don't feel what we have right now is what I'd like to see in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Liam.
Liam Wynn, Jr. Another thing about why I'm totally for the current homework policy is that I also think, besides grades, which is I think most important, I think students should also have lives. Before, I was part of maybe one or two clubs after school, well, minus sports. But now, since I have just more free time since I don't have to do broad stuff that homework gives me, and I could just study like more, I don't know, direct things that I personally struggle in. With that free time, I joined, well, I'm part of NHS, but be completely honest, that's not much time commitment. But I've also joined writing club. I have more time to do Science Olympiad. I have more time to go to the gym. I have more time to hang out with my friends. I just think that with grades, I think that a student should also have a life outside of school. Thank you.
Thanks again. So yeah, we're up to 150% participation for doing the math. So, so thank you. It's actually very encouraging that you came out tonight and to speak about what is important to you. So we thank you for taking the time and sharing with us your thoughts. And with that, one last chance. And we are officially closing public participation this time. And we will go on to item number 3, which is probably why you are staying, which is the parent and teacher survey results regarding the homework protocol. And I will turn the mic over to Mark.
Thank you. I just have a few things I'm going to pass out, and then actually I'm going to go down to the table. So I'll be right with you. Out, Rose. Yeah. Rose. So, Rose. And yep. Oh, I gave one. One is for you. And that's for Rose. One for you. One for Rose. There we go. All right. So before I begin, I just want to take a minute and thank the students for coming tonight. And I know that there are many other students at the high school who have strong feelings about this one way or the other. And I think we've seen recently the power of student voice to make a difference in a lot of things. And so to take the time and to have the energy and the commitment to improving their education is something very, very important. So I really thank you for being here tonight. And hopefully tonight will help explain, if not persuade, that's not really the point, but just to explain a little bit about the context of how this came into being. The first thing I just want to do tonight is talk a little bit about the survey. So, as you know, the homework protocol, I want to just clear one thing up. The policy, actually, of the school board has not changed. The policy, because no individual could change board policy, that would take an action of the board. So I understand how important, how confusing it could be. What's the difference between a protocol or a practice and a policy? The board policy states very clearly that homework is a tool to be used by teachers to provide practice. It very specifically calls out that homework should be differentiated, meaning it should be focused on the need of individual students. It should be reviewed by teachers, commented on, and returned in a timely way. So it can serve as a tool to help inform the teacher's instruction and should also be able to be used to help the student understand where he or she need additional practice. That's the policy of the board, and that has not changed. What did change was the practice related to grading, because the policy doesn't actually speak to grading. It doesn't say that homework should be graded or shouldn't be graded. And in a little while, I'll talk to you about how this practice is an attempt to try to bring some clarification to that part. But I just wanted to be very clear that the policy of the Merrimack School District is that homework is a valuable tool. Nothing about that has changed. However, when this came into practice in the beginning of the school year, it did certainly affect teachers and parents and students. And so we decided that midway through the school year, we would provide an opportunity to have teachers and parents provide input into what they thought about the policy. A very important constituency are students. For a variety of reasons, at the state level, providing surveys to students becomes somewhat more challenging to do, and so we weren't able to use a survey, but we certainly are going to continue to think of other means to try to get more student voice. But it was the survey not being sent to students was not an attempt to quiet students. It was more a reflection of what we're prohibited from doing. So anyway, we worked with Learning Innovations West Ed to develop this survey. West Ed is a company that we've worked with for many, many years. They provided us with consultant support for many years. They've provided us, for instance, they worked very intensively with us in the development of the educator evaluation model. They are a research organization that has a national scope, and they employ psychometricians, people who really develop surveys and analyze surveys, and so we contracted them so that we could be sure that the surveys were created in such a way as to provide objective data and not be slanted one way or another with a certain kind of aim or result. So we worked with West Ed to develop the survey and to analyze the survey results. Just a few details before we get into the specifics. Of approximately 3,100 possible parent respondents, meaning one or the other parent, so about 3,100 or so possible households, 906 parents responded. So that's about 29% return, which is really pretty statistically significant. Out of 334 teachers who could have responded, 132 did, so that was about a 40% return, and so also statistically significant. However, it's important to say that while these are significant returns, they are not representative of the entire population, and so it's just important to talk about how important it is not overgeneralize. So we're talking about 906 out of possible 3,100 people and 132 out of 334. So results are important and however not entirely representative of the entire population. So what I'm going to do is I've provided you, the board had a copy of the survey previously, but I've provided you with a copy of the survey again, and the survey for parents and teachers was really the same except in wording. So instead of please select the grade cluster of your child, it would say please select the grade cluster that you teach in. But I've given you just the parent survey because it's the same questions. And you can go along with those as we go through. So I've provided you with two sets of color charts, one for parents and one for teachers. So we're just going to go through the parents quickly, and for the sake of the audience out there, I will just go through these quickly and provide just numbers. But what I want to say to you is that there's always more to the story than numbers. So I'm just going to actually talk about numbers, and then we'll talk a little bit about the analysis of the numbers after. And finally, before I begin, I would say that I anticipate that the board would wish that these results would be posted, perhaps not, but in the event that that's your wish, I'm completely prepared to do that. Just wanted to say that it didn't seem appropriate to publish these results before we spoke to the board. So tonight's the first opportunity to do that. So I'm more than happy and able to post those if it's the board's wish once we've had a chance to share it with you first. So the first question just had to do with the grade clusters. So we organized a survey in terms of K to 4, just the way our school district is organized, K to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 through 12. So the highest number of parent responses were 309, coming from 9 through 12, followed by 270 K to 4. We had 154 parents responding from 5, 6, and 173 from 7 through 8. The next question was, has your child exhibited a different attitude about homework since the revised practice went into effect? And of 906 total responses, 508 parents responded no. In the section that said, please explain your answer to the question above, of the 906, 745 people actually provided an answer as to why they answered that way. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the coding of that in just a minute. How much ownership do you feel your child is taking over his or her homework? Less ownership, no change, or more ownership? 581 parents said no change in ownership at all. How often do you discuss the importance of homework as helpful practice with your child and actively encourage them to engage in it? 600 parents responded often, and 231 responded sometimes, and a very, very insignificant number responded never or rarely. How have your discussions about homework changed since it became ungraded? 653 out of 906 reported that the discussions really have remained about the same, that there has been no impact. In the open-ended response, it indicated that people do take it seriously, have talked about it at home, and this has not changed that. They continue to do it. Which of the following statements best describes your understanding of the main purpose of the revised homework protocol? That's different from question 9 because it says, which of the following statements do you think best describes your child's understanding? So the first one is, you as a parent, your understanding. And 402 parents responded to provide a more accurate understanding of a student's grade. 106 said to give students more time, and 238 had a variety of other that was coded, and we'll post that up so that people can see what those others were, but they varied substantially. Which of the following statements do you think best describes your child's understanding? And the parents reported that they think their child's understanding was to give them more free time, and then a variety of other reasons that were not listed to provide them with more accurate information about their grade, to raise the standard for achievement, to make it easier for a student to do well. Those are all lesser responses. How much motivation do you feel your child has to complete his or her homework since revised practice went into effect? 565 of the 906 parents who responded said there was no change in motivation. What do you think will happen over time as your child gets used to the revised practice? 409 thought that there would be no change in their child's view of homework. 410 felt that they thought their children might be less motivated over time. How do you think the revised practice will affect your child's grades. 422 thought that there would be no change in their children's grades, and 358 reported that they believed their child's grades would decrease. And a significantly smaller number thought that the grades would increase. If you answered decrease or increase to the question above, do you think the changes to your child's academic grade are likely to be temporary or permanent? And 325 were not sure. 253 thought that they'd be permanent, and a very small number thought that they'd be temporary. How much do you agree with the following statement? That's question 14, which is, in the Merrimack School District, homework is still a required and necessary component of my child's overall instruction. 376 people out of 906 said they agreed. 254 said they strongly agreed. 172 disagreed. And 104 strongly disagreed with that statement. And again, the statement was in the Merrimack School District, homework is still a required and necessary component of my child's overall instruction. What is the most important way that homework practice can be improved? The options were better communication about the purpose to students, parents, and teachers, more consistency in the implementation, more timely and responsive feedback from teachers on homework assignments, suggestions for how I can help my child use homework productively, and make homework count just a little to make it seem more important. 175 parents answered better communication. 148 answered more consistency in implementation. 243 parents said they thought that making homework count just a little to make it seem important would be a good idea to improve the practice. And then number 16 was, do you have any other feedback from the Merrimack School District related to the homework policy? And out of all the questions that had open responses, we generated 976 pages of open responses, all of which needed to be coded and then characterized, which I'll attempt to do in a few minutes. So that's an overview of the parent result. The teacher result is a little bit different. Please select the cluster that you work with primarily, the grade cluster. Out of 132 responses, 59 teachers were from 9 through 12, 29 were K to 4, 18 were 5 to 6, and 26 were grades 7 and 8. Have your students exhibited a different attitude about homework since revised practice went into effect? 96 of 132 respondents, remember out of 334 who could, said yes, students have exhibited a different attitude about homework since the revised practice went into effect. I'll speak about the coded answer to number 3. Please explain your answer in just a minute. Are your students more or less likely to complete homework since the revised practice went into effect? 93 of the 132 who responded said less likely. 38 said no change, and only 1 said they were more likely. How much ownership do you feel your students are taking over their homework since revised practice went into effect? 83 of the 132 teachers who responded said less ownership. 41 said no ownership, and very few, 8, said more ownership. How often do you discuss the importance of homework as helpful practice with your students and actively encourage them to engage in it? 91 said often. 36 said sometimes. How have your discussions about homework changed since it became ungraded? And 74 said their homework discussions have stayed about the same, important as it has always been. Which of the following statements best describes your understanding of the main purpose of the revised homework protocol? 71 of 132 said to provide a more accurate understanding of the student's grade. Which of the following statements do you think best describes your students' understanding of the purpose of the revised homework protocol? And 68 teachers of those who responded said they believe their students think it's to give them more free time. How much motivation do you feel your students have to complete their homework since revised practice went into effect? 97 of the 132 teachers who responded reported decreased motivation, and 32 said no change in motivation. What do you think will happen over time as your students get used to the revised practice? 72 of the 132 reported that they will feel less motivated, and 47 felt that there would be no change in motivation. Question number 12, how do you think the revised practice will affect your students' academic grades? 82 of the 132 teachers thought that their students' grades would decline. If you answered decrease or increase to the question above, do you think the changes to your students' academic grades are likely to be temporary or permanent? 61 teachers reported not being sure about the answer to that question. How much do you agree with the following statement? And again, the statement was, in the Merrimack School District, homework is still a required and necessary component of my child's overall instruction. 47 teachers agreed, 44 strongly agreed, 27 disagreed, and 14 strongly disagreed. When asked by teachers, when asked of teachers, what is the most important way the homework practice can be improved? Making homework count just a little was the chief response, with 36 parents responding, followed by better communication at 32, more consistency in the implementation at 16 parents. So that's a lot of data. That's a lot of information and numbers to give to you. But that's part of the story. The other part of the story that I would share with you has to do with the 906 pages of open responses that we coded. And I would just provide you with, given that it was 906 pages, we could stay here till early in the morning or later, so I'm going to summarize those right now. But what I would tell you is that there appear to be, particularly, well, with both parents and students, a very, very big difference between elementary parents and elementary teachers and secondary parents and secondary teachers having to do with this. In other words, to summarize, elementary parents and elementary teachers are generally supportive of the change in protocol and do not feel that it has decreased motivation, think that it's an important practice, and are happy to keep it in place. A significant number of those who responded, now remember, of those who responded, that's either 29 or 40% of the total, but of 9 through 12 parents and teachers are really strongly not in favor. Data is an interesting thing in that it can illuminate assumptions, and in some of the coded responses as to why do you believe that is so, that it's not helpful. Parents indicate that they want homework to be graded because they want to boost their students' grades. And so the assumption of expressed by many parents and teachers is that homework is intended to be a boost to a student's grade. I'll have a little more to say about that in a few minutes, but that's the data illuminating some assumptions. Teachers feel strongly that graded homework is an inducement to students to complete their homework, feeling rather strongly that without it, they would not be inclined to complete it. Just provide you with a couple of more thoughts. If you look at a question about the relationship between homework and effectiveness of your work product in general, and what's the relationship, it seems that a lot of parents don't think, high school parents particularly, don't necessarily think that their children understand that connection very well. And so that's an area, for instance, that we can do quite a bit of work with our teachers to help the teachers more ably communicate the goal of homework in general and the goal of this practice in particular as relates to that relationship between what you put in and what you get out. But having said that, and you'll hear me say this a number of times tonight, I take responsibility for the fact that if there are a good number of teachers who aren't clear on that point, I have to look to myself to question how well did I communicate that so that teachers could then communicate that. And I think there's fairly strong evidence that teachers went into this not as clear about it as I might have assumed they were. And so that's on me. And so I will completely take responsibility for that. And then whatever the board chooses to do in moving forward, I will make sure that whatever that is, we do a better job of communicating to teachers, because you can't expect teachers to enact a revised practice without really full understanding. And I think it's clear that there wasn't sufficient understanding about that relationship. The question, do you have any other feedback from Merrimack School District related to the homework policy? 441 of the 906 responded to that, and it wouldn't surprise you to know that the responses were really diffuse. So 76 of that 441 said they agree with the policy. 17 said it reduced stress level. 15 said their child's grades have gone up. 8 said they like having free time after school for their children. And then a variety of things. These are all open-ended responses that people had a chance to write in. So it's hard to code that because you're wanting to provide opportunity for individual voice, but sometimes it's just one person who wrote in something. So while it's important to that person, statistically it's not a significant finding, but significant to that person. So that will all be put up on the website. Another consistent finding, K through 12, had to do with inconsistency of implementation, and I think some of our students tonight talked about that. There appears to be still a considerable amount of flux from school to school and within a grade, even in a school, about what the practice is regarding classwork and homework, what constitutes each, and why it might be that we wouldn't be grading. And so if a student were to ask, the likelihood of multiple teachers giving different answers to that same question seems quite high. And so clearly the data points out there is a significant area for improvement on helping people to better understand what is the goal and the effort. So in a nutshell, and this is quite a nutshell when you think about 906 pages of coding, but the takeaway is that there is a very big difference between elementary teachers and parents and high school teachers and parents when it comes to their perception of the value of this practice change. And in various ways, the communication is, particularly from parents and teachers of older students, that it is an important component of an overall grade, helps to boost the GPA, and looking for, in saying in a variety of ways, different ways to make that part of it. And then it is an important inducement. So one of the things, now I'll just turn away from the data for a minute, and I'll say that prior to getting the survey results back, it was clear to me that communication about this could be better, could have been better. And so I didn't need a survey result to tell me that. So in that spirit, I have begun a tour around the district, and I've completed 2 of 6 faculty meetings where I have spoken about the context for this practice to change. And again, not in an effort to persuade people who don't agree, but as an explanation for why it is so. And so I'm going to complete that by early March after break, and so teachers in all 6 buildings will have heard this same thing. And if you wouldn't mind if I could just spend a few minutes with the board tonight talking about that as well. because I think it's important that the board continues to understand that context so that you can make your informed decision, and also for anybody listening that they can as well. So some of this I think will be familiar to you, but about a year and a half ago, we undertook an initiative to redo the elementary report card. It has been in place for a long time, like the educator evaluation model had been in place a long time before it was changed. And so when anything in our business is in place for a very long time, it causes you to wonder, well, maybe we need to look at this. Is it as effective a tool now as it was when it was developed? And so we pulled together a team of teachers, elementary teachers and administrators. I'm talking about elementary now, not 7 through 12, but K to 6. And we sat around a table and we started talking about things like, what does a B mean? You know, what does a B's worth of knowing mean? It's something we all grew up with. You'd rather have an A than a B. You'd rather have a C than an F. But if you ask the question, what does a B's worth of knowing look like? When you average grades together, it's kind of hard to say with specificity. You know, kind of like, well, I guess you knew a lot if you have a B, but you didn't know as much as you could because you didn't get an A. But what is it that you didn't know? It gets a little bit harder to understand and to explain. So we began to talk about, well, how could a new reporting system help clarify that a little bit better? And I'm not going to get into that now. That's for another day. But we talked about that. We are continuing to talk about that. How does one report so that one understands, a teacher and a parent and a student really understand what their grade means? So then we said, well, before we even start this, we should really kind of ask ourselves what goes into a grade, whether you average it or however you determine some kind of summative assessment. What constitutes that? And so we just put up our hands, well, tests, quizzes, and so on, and then it came up homework. And so then the question was, okay, and how much does homework count? Well, I count it 3%. It's just nothing. It's just a little thing. And some people would say, well, maybe 10% or some more than 10%. So then the question started to be, if homework is included in an average that gets reported as a grade, that gets understood as what do you know and what do you understand, is that an accurate reflection of what a student knows and understands? A lot of times people say, you know, the research says, and then I think what happens is people hope that nobody asks what the research says because, you know, that's just like, it sounds good, but, you know, I hope you don't really ask me. Well, I actually do have research, and we actually did do a lot of research on this subject. And really what the research would say is that students do not use students do not use homework as a tool to. I'm sorry. Let me just say this differently. Research is a tool to engage in practice. Research is a tool that helps students to learn better, to understand better, to work more effectively, and it should be seen as that. So when we continued to look at the practice of implementing homework, I've just completely lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. I've got so many things I want to explain. Can you just give me a...
So you're just trying to talk about what research has said about the homework and how it plays out when you're formulating the grade.
I'm sorry, when you're right. So so the question then becomes when you're trying to add a homework component to a grade, that's really a behavior. The research says it's a behavior. And so a behavior is not the same thing as what a student knows and understands. It's a tendency to do something when called upon to ask to do it. So that's what homework really is. And so your tendency to do it or not do it doesn't imply that you know the content particularly well or unwell. It just means you do the thing that's being asked of you. And so if that behavior is clustered with an academic grade, it gives potentially a false impression about what a student knows and is able to do. So for instance, if I am always doing homework and I consistently do what's been asked of me, and I pass it into my teacher, whether it's graded or ungraded, reviewed or unreviewed, I get points for having done it. It could be that the student would provide homework that really is all wrong. However, because the student did it, they get points. Now, if that happens consistently over time, what then happens is that a student's average could theoretically raise quite a bit. And if that happens, is that an accurate reflection of what they know and are able to do? Now, the logic goes that some students really aren't good test takers. And so we recognize that, and we recognize that it's very important to provide students with an opportunity to demonstrate what they know in a variety of ways. So sometimes it's a paper, pencil test or quiz, sometimes it's something online, sometimes it's a presentation, sometimes it's a project or a portfolio. So recognizing that there's not one modality that students can demonstrate what they know best, it's also important to say that there has to be a way to ask a student to demonstrate what they know at a given point in time and what they understand, and have that be the record of what they can do relative to the content. And when you conflate a behavior, which is a tendency, my tendency to do something or not do something, with an academic grade, and you project that some of those two things equals you understand a lot or you don't, that's not an accurate reflection that we're trying to give to parents. Here's an example. For those who want homework to count as a boost, we have seen a number of examples, and by a number I mean a lot of examples, where students would, if you just go down the line to the logical conclusion of this, which is I'm going to apply to college, and you have a transcript that has been sometimes minimally, sometimes extensively elevated by the presence of a homework grade, you're projecting something that isn't necessarily a reflection of what you know and are able to do. And so let's just say that the college accepts you based on that understanding, and then one gets to school with everybody's assumption that you can handle the difficulty or the challenge of this particular college, only to find out that the fact that you are here is a reflection of the fact that you are able to boost a grade based on non-academic behaviors, like whether you did your homework or not. So in the case of a student who has an average of tests and quizzes and so on that's, let's say, an 85, but the student is able to consistently do homework, and so that maybe bumps up to 88 or 90, there's a big difference between an 85's worth of knowing and a 90's worth of knowing, particularly in what it says to people receiving it, whether it's a teacher next year or the college next year. And so it's very important to try to clarify just what is it exactly that we're promoting as an authentic grade. So take an example of a student who consistently does very well in every kind of assessment that they're given, paper, pencil tests, quizzes, presentations, and yet they consistently never do their homework. So that student maybe would get a 93 or a 95, but because they have not done their homework, their grade is brought down. So now maybe they have a 90 or an 88, and you project that. So now you say to mom and dad, well, you know, they're doing okay, you know, really, they have an 88. Really? I mean, I'm so surprised. I thought they were doing so much better than that. Well, you know, they don't do their homework. Well, does their not having done their homework mean that they don't know or understand? Because I really thought we were really kind of in a good place. No, they're doing great, but you know, they're going to do their homework. Is that an accurate reflection that ought to be put on a report card? Is that any more accurate than what gets stated on a report card that a student has a 90 when perhaps they've really earned an 85 and what they can demonstrate is knowing and understanding? So these are the considerations that we were really taking into account when we were trying to figure out what to do about this. Notwithstanding that there are lots and lots of teachers who consistently said things like, I can't figure out how to get my students to do their homework. So it's been a consistent problem. So the logic is if we consistently have a problem with getting kids motivated to do homework and do exactly what we've always been doing, we can't really expect a different result. So then the question became, well, maybe we should just make homework count for everybody. Because remember, in the current policy, it doesn't require that anybody gets graded on anything. So some teachers do and some teachers don't. So now it's up to the student. Okay, I have Professor Schoenfeld, and she always grades, but then I have Professor Thompson, and never grades, so this I have to worry about, that I don't, and so on and so forth. And that becomes problematic. So why don't we just decide, instead of deciding nobody does homework, nobody has to have graded homework, why don't we decide that everybody will have graded homework? That presents a unique problem, because I think certainly this is very familiar to educators, if not to the general public. There is not a fair playing field for a lot of students in this or any town. That is, there are some students in Merrimack who have a tremendous amount of support at home for homework. And while this might offend some, it is the truth, and I'm going to say it. There are some people who really are too involved in their children's homework and present it as if it is the students. In other cases, there is just the right amount of support and inducement and encouragement by the parent to do the homework. And so in those cases, if it's required, then those students get a big boost in their grade. But it's required, so you get it to count. There are a lot of students in this town and other towns who aren't quite sure where they're going home to, or if there's going to be support at home or even somebody at home. And for some, survival is a pretty big deal beyond just, getting their homework done. But if the policy were to say we're going to grade it all, regardless of what they're able to produce, those students are at a disadvantage if we say homework must count. I've had parents actually say to me, that's not my problem, because my student is what I'm worried about. And I understand that. As a parent of two, I understand that. But in my role, that has to be my problem. I cannot personally support a system where some students do better than others just by virtue of the circumstances of where they go home to at night. That might seem like a insignificant problem to some, but it's a very significant problem if we're talking about equity and transparency and accuracy of grades. So then the question is, well, then why don't we just not have it count, which is what we decided to do. But I recognize there are implications in that. So, for instance, if it doesn't count, the very real likelihood that grade would suffer as a result, and that we would have to encounter that problem with parents and students. It's very possible that teachers would just disagree with that. And in the disagreement of that, perhaps engage in behaviors that make it a little bit more confusing for a student to understand, well, what the heck am I doing? And so we recognize that, and clearly there's work to be done there. But what we ultimately decided is that homework is an action over which we really have no control. We have no control over who does it, how much support is provided, how little support is provided, and then to add that into an academic grade when there's so little external control over what constitutes that grade doesn't seem to solve our primary goal, which is to provide an accurate reflection of what a student knows and is able to do at a given point in time. And so, based on all those considerations, we decided to implement the practice of not grading homework. And again, I just want to reiterate, Merrimack has never, nor ever will, I don't think, say that homework is not important. I will say it again, homework is essential. It's essential because it's an important practice for helping a student do better in the content area that they are working in. Just as we would not expect an athlete to be a starter on any team just because they showed up. They have to go to practice, they have to work, and the logical outcome of that practice and work is doing better such that they can earn their spot on the team. This is really no different from that. The idea of providing external inducements to do what is essentially the right thing to do seems insufficient for the challenge that we face. I have 2 children. At a certain point, it was important for me to have them know that they needed to brush their teeth because it was the right thing for them to do, and I didn't give them a candy bar every time they brushed their teeth. They just brushed their teeth because it's something that they needed to learn to do, and I firmly believe that students are able to understand the difference between doing the right thing because it's the right thing and doing the right thing because you're going to give me something for it. And a lot of folks that I talk to talk about the importance of providing, preparation for quote unquote the real world. And in the real world, one is expected to do what is sort of their job and aren't given bonuses or extra $5 in the paycheck for doing what is their job. And for a student, homework is an important part of their job as learners. And so I think that we're talking about somehow trying to create a slightly different culture in our district about what motivation is and how the connection between doing one's homework and practice and a logical outcome of a better performance, trying to see those connections. That's our job to draw that parallel. Just one final note. We have talked in the Standards-Based Report Card Committee and throughout the district about having there be a place on any future report card that would show the tendency of a person to do or not do their homework. So, for instance, New Hampshire used to call that habits of mind. And habits of mind would be a sort of a part of any report card or that would say, these are the behaviors that this student tends to engage in. Like, for instance, they are always on time for class. I note that they've never been tardy. I note that they always complete their homework. I note that they always raise their hand in class. Those are habits. Those aren't academic things in and of themselves, but they're habits that support academic quality and integrity. And so there's a place on a report card to say, never does homework. And here's the interesting thing. If you could report there were 20 homework assignments this year, and pardon me, Mr. Thompson has done none of them, but he has a 95 average on a variety of different assessments that play to different modalities, then what does it really matter that he hasn't done his homework? And we would say, well, it's either that the homework hasn't been rigorous enough for him, or he has simply chosen not to do it because it hasn't been necessary for him, because he can still produce. So we can draw that parallel. Let's say Mr. Thompson has done everything, every bit of homework, and we have it, and his average is C. Then we can maybe say, well, then maybe something instructionally needs to change. If he's done everything we've asked him to do as practice, and his average hasn't really increased very much, that's expressive of something that we need to talk and learn more about. So there's certainly a correlation between the tendency to do the behavior of homework or not and an outcome, and that's really an interesting thing to look at. So we're not talking about not reporting the behavior, but we are simply saying not adding it into an academic grade. So in a nutshell, that's the sort of the quick version, if you can believe it, of the lengthy dialogue that we've had in district for quite a while about this. The intent of this is not to persuade, but rather to just explain and to express that there's been a lot of talk about this, and I recognize that change is difficult, and perhaps this is a change that's too big or too much, but but change is difficult, and but we are trying to do it for the right reason and to achieve the right outcome. So that's the short story of a very long enterprise, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I see Naomi and Michael, and I think we're all going to go. So we'll just start from the end. And Chris, you're absolutely welcome to pipe in as well if you want to start. Do you want to kick it off, or you just give me a thumbs up? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so we'll let Chris wrap it up from a student's perspective. So we'll go with you first, Naomi.
That was a whole lot of information. Thank you very much for that summary. I'm sure we all have a lot to say. I just have a couple of things to pop in there, two comments and a question. The first comment is I think it's important to recognize that there will always be tension between students and families' desire for certain grades and a school and district's desire for the grades to reflect what's known. Society wants good grades, and people want their children to have good grades because it has certain effects on their lives. We have the responsibility to also make sure those grades mean something, and that in some ways creates this kind of creative tension, and I think we're seeing that play out somewhat. I want to recognize part of what I was hearing from students and from others is that this can be scary, especially if somebody's gotten certain grades and suddenly that changes because it feels like the ground is shifting underfoot. And I think we have some responsibility to recognize and work with that. That said, the question. You've pulled out this distinction, which I think is a very important one, between a school or district for which grades are a combination of motivators and knowledge. So a grade would represent part of a student tried and partly what a student knows, versus a model where the grade purely represents what a student knows and other things represent what's tried or not tried. So my question is this. In the examples that you gave, have you encountered or can you think of one where not grading homework leads to a less accurate portrayal of what a student knows? Because I'm thinking, I'm not finding one, but I'm curious what you come across for that.
So I haven't, but I'd also tell you that, I haven't spoken to every teacher, K to 12, who's attempted to implement this. So by my saying I haven't doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But no, I have not encountered that to date.
If you had to kind of extrapolate, can you imagine from your experience of places where that might happen and how we might deal with that?
And again, the specific is, can you just say the specific again?
I think that the scenario that I've heard most is the sense that homework, there are students for whom homework is the best measure of their knowledge, as opposed to simply of their effort. And so I'm curious, what I'm teasing apart is whether you've seen that, and if so, how do we translate that into the new model, that piece of success?
So part of what I say about that is that I absolutely recognize, and I think there was some testimony tonight to the effect that if a student isn't particularly able to produce in a somewhat traditional way, like a paper pencil test or some other means of providing a summative of what you know and are able to do, if a student isn't able to do that through test anxiety or anything else, can I show you, in another way? And for some, the practice has been, can I show you through what I know in homework? The problem with that, and I don't mean this is any disrespect to the vast majority of people who I think do it honorably and in the right way, but the problem is that there isn't really a way to gauge there's no way to control for that. And so when a student takes their work home, it is not possible to know what aids or lack of aids have been in place to provide, the sum that would be able to be used as an assessment of what you know and are able to do. That's, again, not to say that the vast majority of students don't do it exactly correctly and right and honorably. But there is no control for that. And so, whereas it's very reasonable to talk about what way we could maybe put some value on homework as part of a grade to be a compromise. Well, there's value in doing that. The ultimate question is, does that tendency to engage in homework, with all the variables that I've described, create an accurate picture of what a student knows and is able to do? And ultimately, that's our goal. Our goal as teachers is to know, what do we have in front of us? What do we need to work on? And if anything is clouded in that picture, it prevents instruction from being calibrated to what a student needs. Likewise, parents deserve honest information about what a student knows and is able to do. And if that information, honest and accurate, and if that information is clouded by the behaviors that are part of homework, and if the summative result is either inflated or deflated because of that, a parent doesn't necessarily know, well, do I need to go to Sylvan Learning Center and get a tutor, or are we okay here? And so that's what I would say to you is the problem that we've continually encountered. I do not proclaim for a minute that this is the answer, but what I am saying is that it's an attempt to try to address a really challenging problem that we've encountered for kind of a long time.
Thank you.
Michael?
Thank you for coming tonight to present on the current homework policy or procedure. Protocol, there we go, practice. I have some feedback that I'd like to share. I'm not asking really for any response tonight. I think that it's been taken on from many people that I've spoken to, and want to share this at this meeting tonight. So one of the things that I think may be beneficial is to actually have the grading breakdown reviewed by each department head. So to know that there's consistency across the different classes and the different teachers, and also to make sure that they're following the protocol. Right, there we go. I'm trying to use the right language here.
So $1 in the jar for that one.
Yeah. Then the next thing would be access to to homework assignments. So there's inconsistency, and I think this goes back to one of the things that you're talking about communication. Some teachers are putting it on a website. Some teachers are putting it in PowerSchool, and then some people are putting it in a third app, the secondary app beyond PowerSchool that's available. So there's inconsistency of actually having homework communicated so that either the student or the parent can actually access and see what the student should be doing for that night. Additionally, I think this is both, these kind of tied together. It's around workload. I think there should be some standard based off the conversation that I had, that a homework assignment should be able to be done in a certain amount of time by the average student. And I've seen this in the past with, and I'll use my daughter since I can because she's already out of the class, but coming home with 70 plus questions of math, that is, the workload is not valuable at that point, is actually beyond valuable. And I think that actually ties to also another thing that a parent has provided, is that sometimes they feel that honors classes means more homework. Additionally, I think that one of the things that was brought up today by the individual speaking tonight, thank you very much, was classwork. I believe that if it's called classwork, it should be able to be finished in class. So therefore, you can't give it 5 minutes left, the classwork, and be then assigned as classwork. We talked about the homework buffer. I think you did a very good job of showing that the homework buffer was very inconsistent across multiple areas. And also, again, homework, if it's not graded, if it's 5% just for doing homework, it's still not showing that you actually comprehend the homework. Then, sorry, I have quite a few things. I think also with this homework policy, what has been shown is that it allows an individual student to focus on the challenges that that individual has. So if the individual comes home and let's just say it's 20 problems, and they understand the first one, that's the first 5, all they have to really do is that first one, not all 5. And then they can move on to the next group and do the next group. So it allows the student some flexibility to actually focus on the areas that they need to. It's kind of like just like work. If you have a job that you don't know how to write well, then you go and figure out how to write well versus doing marketing activities or something like that. That's myself, just if anybody's wondering. And then the other thing is inconsistency of homework that is assigned. Homework is not being given back corrected if it is actually being given by the students, by the teachers to the students. I think that is, if you're asking someone to practice and they're not being told what's wrong, they're going to continue to practice with what's wrong. So as a coach of soccer, if I see a kid that's kicking it wrong, I tell them to correct it and show them how to correct it instead of them continuing to practice the wrong way. So I think that's a big one. And then also if parents want homework to be part of their grade, then homework needs to be graded. So it can't just be a homework buffer as it's basically being put out there. It should be graded. And I don't think that's right, personally, because it is that practice. You're practicing. I let kids during practice, try something new to see if they can do it well and learn from it. And I think what it does, it allows that kid to go outside its boundaries and student go outside their boundaries to try something harder. Instead of having that rigor to be like, oh, I have to get everything perfect in order to, get that. And then the last thing, my last one, you brought up a big point about what is a B, what is an A. I had a teacher when I was in high school that really about an 80 was considered an A. Because what that teacher would do is purposely put questions on tests that you shouldn't be able to answer. But it's giving that student that chance to try to, expand their mind and actually do something better. So an A is not necessarily 100. An A can be much less, but it's the guideline that the teacher has provided as if you know this, that is the level that is considered an A. So it's just some of the stuff, and I'll be happy to discuss those at another meeting if you wanted to bring back some information. So, thank you.
Yeah, but it's your. Please don't let me stop you.
No, I was writing all that down. I just wanted to say one thing about your point about if homework is going to count, then it should be graded. I agree with you. I mean, that's the logical conclusion that should be drawn from this. But then that fundamentally changes what homework is. Homework is supposed to be practice. You're not supposed to be awesome at your homework because it's practice, and it's meant for you to practice the thing that you don't know super well so that you can do better at it at another point. So if you don't do your homework, you're likely to not get better. But if you do, you should be able to show what you don't know so that the teacher then can take that, leverage it to help instruct you. If that's going to be graded, then we are turning something that was supposed to be a formative exercise into something very, very different. And I don't think that we really understand the implications of what that means. But I think you raise a good point that we certainly would have to talk about that if that were ever to be proposed. So I would just comment and say... And
I agree with you.
Yeah.
So I think the philosophy there is to agree. And I think, just to your point, practice is something that you do to get better, just as any professional does stuff outside of their working hours to get better at their job. It doesn't, like you said, I don't get paid to read a book after hours to get better at sales. That's what I do in order to have a better outcome at work. So I agree.
Thanks.
Andy?
Thanks. So we could sit here for days talking about this stuff. It's all my time on the board, it's probably one of the most deep subjects that we've gotten into, and one that has a lot of emotions depending on who you talk to. I think for those listening at home, when they see the sort of pie charts that you put together in the handouts, it helps to really see the data and the spread across it. And for me, seeing these for the first time, just the different perception on some of the questions that the teachers and the parents had was shocking in terms of how the teachers, I think, have more concern about the way the protocol is currently implemented is really interesting. What was interesting to me is when you talked about how, how there was a different viewpoint if you're at the elementary level versus where you're at the high school level. So for me, looking at other things that we've done in the district in terms of new curriculum and things like this, if we're talking about changing the way that we approach homework, the consistent that we want to try to build and stuff, in some ways it almost seems like if you're going to institute change, start at the elementary level and build the concept in, and then as you work your way up, you work through the upper L, and then you work to the middle, and then you work to the high school. Because then it puts the culture into the students and the teachers, and even the parents, because they sort of all go through the same thing. So for me, I think that there's value to what you're saying, but the problem is the higher you go up the education chain of age, the more impact the way it's always been done sort of comes into play here. Because really it feels like what you're trying to do, while academically very appropriate, we're one of the few places around that's sort of taken this little bit of a leap, if you will, to really push the envelope. And the trouble is we're playing in a sandbox where everybody else is doing it the same way, and maybe they have little things like that. So for me, it's a little bit of a, are we jumping a little too far? Are we, is this the right level to take here? I think that the students with their ideas that we talked about if you decide not to do it because you're able to show, proficiency in your exams without doing homework, and you choose not to do it, it should not have a negative impact. But if a student takes the time to show effort in his practice, there should be something to help support his work and his desire to learn more, above and beyond a student that gets it easy. I mean, I was one of the kids in high school that I got it really easy. I didn't do homework, or if I did it pretty quick. When I get to college, the brick wall hit me because I needed to work harder on it, not so I got grades, but because I needed to work harder on it. So I think that by offering kids the option, and again, this is going to be hard to do, but having not negative impact if you don't do it, but a potential for some small percentage increase to help with that buffer if they do choose to do it, might be a compromise to take as you're going through this. And my final thought is one of the things that I still haven't heard, and this is a challenge to the administration, especially at the high school level, we talk about competencies a lot. We haven't lately, but we used to. We talked about the introduction of competencies, competency-based grading and things. And I know other districts that talk about making homework more optional pull competencies in to help be the carrot. We talked about the carrot being great. Competencies and helping improve competencies based on practice is something that's being used, and I know a couple of districts that we researched early on. But I haven't heard us talk about competencies and how this feeds into that. So as we get further into the process, I really want to see how that comes in, because remember, numerical grades are only part. If you don't pass competencies, but you get 100%, you don't get the credit. We've talked about that. So how does homework play into that? How does it help to kick somebody up above and beyond? To me, that's something I still want to understand. So,
of course.
So I appreciate those thoughts and those questions. Two things. I'll start with the second one first, and then go to the. I appreciate your mentioning competencies. So the fact that we haven't talked about them recently doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of work going on. And I'm happy at another point to talk to the board about the work, particularly at the high school, but then also to talk about how the very early stages of the emerging standards-based report card are playing into competencies. Remember, competencies were required at the high school. They were not required at the elementaries. Now that's changing, and our report card is reflecting that. But the point about the homework and competencies is actually a really good one. Competencies have everything to do, again, with what you know and what you're able to demonstrate. And the reason, in my judgment, and the judgment of a lot of people, I think that competencies are sort of a better system than the other system gets back to what is a B. So if you're in a language arts class and your final midterm or final grade is composed of what you've written, what you've read, what you've analyzed, whether you know the difference between a period and a semicolon, topic sentences, your ability to debate and argue a point, any number of those things. If your B is a composite of all those things and you have a B, the question then becomes, Well, if you're motivated to know, why didn't I get an A? But the average means that you did really well on this and really poorly on this, but together you have a B. In a competency, you're able to be much more granular to say, if we break down the language arts standards here, you excel, so a 4, on your ability to construct a sentence and construct a paragraph, but you have a 2 on topic development. Maybe you have a 1 on analysis. So now you can be very granular to a student, say, you don't have to work on grammar anymore, and I don't have to really teach you grammar right now, but we do have to work on this. That's very different from having a B and having to hunt and peck for what within that I'm going to have to work on. So if we were to include I get your point about a little inducement for those who want to, but the argument still stands. If you conflate the tendency to do something or not do something with what you know and are able to do, that really kind of goes against the theory of a competency, which is just what can you do. And if I'm going to give you a couple of extra points because you brought in cupcakes, or because you brought in cleaning supplies, or I'm going to give you a couple of points because you filled, you did homework, whether you did it well or not, is the antithesis of what a competency grade is. Because a competency grade is supposed to be pretty pure. It's what can you produce when called upon to produce it. So if we're going to characterize how one does by including other things than just that, it gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. And so back to the idea of a correlation. The tendency to do or not do something correlated to how you're doing on an academic task is worth noting. If I never do my homework and I do terribly in class, well, then maybe the first thing we can talk about is why don't you do your homework before we hire a tutor and see if that works for you. And all the different variations on those correlations could really be telling. So I'm trying to, I don't know if I've done it, but I'm trying to provide you at least one response, which is that the relationship between the homework protocol that's in place and competencies, I think, actually is more pure and more supportive of competency initiative than not.
But to me, that's the way you've just explained it is the first time that I've really heard you talk about the correlation between the homework and the competencies through all of this. Because at least maybe you thought, but for me listening, it's been the first time. Because if it's not about grades, if it's truly about academic demonstration and things like that, and competency is the way we show it, then that needs to be part of the documentation as to why we've moved away from grade and why we're doing it in this fashion. Because students that do well just because they get it versus a student that has to work hard to prove it, that's where homework comes into play. I mean, that's, it's one thing to say I get a buffer to help me in school, but the kids, my contention in having 3 kids over the years is the kids that struggle in tests, if they can prove to the teacher through doing homework and getting it looked at that they're understanding the concept or maybe missing a certain concept, can make up for that in parallel so that when they do take the test, they improve their chances of doing better. And competencies is the tool that we now have that we didn't have 4 years ago or 5 years ago. And I like to make sure that whatever we do to craft this going forward, that the tie-in and the rigor, if you will, and this is why I said sort of growing the culture from the lower grades up. How you do competencies, what competency roles play, and how homework plays. And if we decide not to do grades, I mean, at least have some rational, quantifiable reason for doing it. And that's where I was really coming from here, is that it's not for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, for example, if a student has issues with competencies, but they've shown through doing their homework that they are working towards it, or maybe they've proven it here, but they can't prove it in their demonstrated work in tests. Sometimes schools will allow remediation to say, look, you've tried to do this, you did poorly on a test, let's give you remediation on a certain part of the test that tests that competency that you need. and maybe you can improve your grade in that way, as opposed to a buffer for homework. Maybe there's a way to improve your grade that you get for your exams and things like that. I think that was something that I'd like to hear more about as we go through the process. So anyway, that's it.
And my turn. And I'm going to play a little bit off of what you were saying about remediation. And I know I'm just going to use contextual. I know that a lot of remediation is, you have to recover competencies. So you didn't get, you have a 1 because you did not meet competency, and we'll talk about your analysis. But in the same token, I'm going to go back to the students who spoke earlier and say, what's it doing to their GPA? What's it doing to their transcript? What's it doing to their ability to apply for certain scholarships? So, yes, it's great that we can recover competency and show that we're recovering competencies, but on the same token, I think that's important for us to look at if the child is making those efforts, recovering those competencies, showing that understanding, that there needs to be, with fewer touch points on grades, having the opportunity to also get a numeric improvement in their grade, not just a competency improvement, because I think that's going to help them when they are applying to colleges, because they have proven to you with their second attempt that they have recovered those skill sets. And I think that's important right now, because with those homework grades not coming in, you're that's the bottom number in division. Denominator. I'm like, numerator, denominator. Okay, so the denominator number is much smaller than it would have been with all those homework grades. And you're right. I think that, that homework grades did falsely inflate a child's ability to prove that they understand the concept. I agree with you. I applaud that we're not taking that into consideration and making everyone a higher measured student than they actually are. You're right. I worry about those kids going to college, and the kid to the left and the kid to the right got there because they had great homework grades. The kid that's left was the one that studied and understood the concept in that first week of college. But I think we need to look at what we're doing for the big picture. We don't want our collective GPA to go down because we put this in place. My note is supports. So, as we're changing the culture on how we're measuring a student's success, I think that it's up to us to say, how are we supporting that culture and giving the students tools based on how we're measuring their effectiveness to be successful in this culture. And that's one thing that I know it's a new process. I know refining. I know our rollout year is always the hardest year of any new organizational change. But that's something I think we need to hear more about, is where the supports are going to go in place. Now that homework is not part of that, falsely inflated grade, but there are students that aspire to get good grades. How are we going to support them in their goal to make those good grades? So I think that we definitely want to look at that area as an area for improvement as well. Communication, I thank you for acknowledging that, there so often, we're put in these positions of, we have to stand firm to our position, but there are things we could have done better and differently. And for us to say that, I think is a very honest, and it really supports good dialogue with this district. And I appreciate you saying that. It was probably not a comfortable thing to say. But yeah, we need to do more communication, supports, infrastructure in the district to be able to get those kids supports. And 2 things I wrote down were Sylvan and tutors. The last thing I want to do is bankrupt parents to get them, again, those who can and those who cannot, get them to tutors, get them to Sylvan, pay for those resources, to have to do that just because we changed the way that we measure the grades. So what supports can we put in place? And I keep coming back to that same arrow on the page. Whether it be a study club, whether it be additional supports from the teacher, certain days of the week in classes, whatever the case may be. I didn't hear tonight what the actual GPA impact was to students as a collective number. That would be of interest. I think Mike hit on that with the department heads' feedback. I think that would be very helpful. This dialogue's not going to end tonight, I'm sure. So something we could do. Something one of the students that talked in public participation said was 1 minute in class to finish at night. I never heard 1 minute, but I do have 2 high schoolers. So I have heard a little bit in class and mostly at night. So that's something I've actually heard in my own house. And so, at the end of the day, we want to put out students who have good concept of the learning, what we've taught them, can practice it, can understand where the concept came from and be able to work off of that, but we want to make sure that as they're preparing for those colleges, so they are going to be probably some of the best students in colleges because of the way we're preparing them for those institutions, and even preparing them for the workforce. I think this type of protocol does help with that too. Again, self-motivation, independent thinking, preparation, and success. I think that works in either of those lanes. But for those who are going on to higher education, not only is it harder to get in the door of those schools, it's harder to get money back to get them in those schools to be able, so they either come out with lesser debt or just the opportunity to go to the school of their choice, and that it doesn't become, Merrimack's 95 is really a stronger 95 than Londonderry's or Bedford's or Nashua's. But a 95 is a 95 is a 95 when the college has two students to look at. Do they know the Merrimack way well enough to know the difference? So we want to make sure we're setting them up to be able to thrive both academically and financially, because we haven't given the money to a kid that has a 95 from a school that may not have worked as hard for it. So those are the things I do worry about. I kind of hit on, I think I'm listening to what you guys are saying as from a high school perspective, from the teacher's perspective, from the parent's perspective. We have gotten some feedback from that. There's refinements to be done. I don't think what this protocol was wrong. I think it was the right thing to do, and I think there's just more work to do to make it a fine-oiled machine. But I think we also have the confidence in your capabilities to take that information and run with it. So I think there's more to be done, but I think that you're in a good place to do it. So I did see other hands, but I wasn't sure who's which, because it was like I was talking, so it's corner of my eye. So it's Michael and Naomi as well? And then, Chris, I definitely want to hear what you have to say, because I know you have something to say. Great. So you want to go first, Chris, since you are the student? You haven't talked yet.
So, my opinions regarding the homework policy is I really like
protocol. Dollar in the jar.
Just a name, whatever. The protocol is that, while it hasn't really changed my grades, I'm still like a solid B student. I have so much more free time to do what I like to do. And I want to go to college for film, and I can actually I don't have to, my plate isn't extremely full of homework anymore. I can put some time into studying for that. And I think a lot of students would agree with me on that. It's actually a pretty even split in the high school of people who like it and don't like it. But I think a big thing is definitely consistency in the policy. I have teachers who will give out homework, correct it, and go over it with us. I have teachers who will give us homework the last 30 seconds of class and then grade it the next day. And then I have teachers who just give us homework and don't touch it ever again. So I think some consistency in that area would help a lot. But otherwise, I really like the policy. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So they have Michael and Naomi.
Thank you. I just want to touch on a couple of things that came up, and one is remediation. My understanding is that the teachers have the capability to actually remediate bad grades through either other testing means or, as an example, allowing students to take the test back, correct what they've actually gotten wrong, and reassess it, maybe not getting full credit, but also. So I think that what needs to be communicated is that there are methods that your child can self-advocate for, which is what I promote our children to do, is self-advocate for themselves first before any other means that a parent or anybody gets involved. Additionally, and I want to be corrected if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is there's not really much difference between competency and grade. I mean, one is equivalent to the other, right? If you're competent in something, you should be able to present it within your grade. I mean, go ahead.
Theoretically, that's true. Theoretically, but to the point that's been made tonight, I don't think I could say with confidence that always plays out that way. So, in other words, a 4, there should be some correlation between a 4 and an average that's pretty high. If there isn't, and there sometimes isn't, it calls into question the fidelity with which these things are being done. But that's not just true in Merrimack. That's true more broadly. But theoretically, what you said is true, but it is not always the case in practice.
So, and then the last one, we talked about, homework, if you do X number of homework assignments, it can increase a grade. I think that this kind of goes back, and I think I mentioned it before, but just consistency on, the challenge that I don't think many people saw was that there was inconsistent values, as you pointed out, that one teacher might actually have no value to homework, even though they're giving it out and collecting it. So I believe that there was teachers that had 0% of their homework actual in the grade, final grade. Then there's teachers that might have 3, 5, 10, 15. That is obviously not something that should have been done before, because, as you said, if you're getting 100% because you're just passing in homework, someone's got a 12-point difference already on their grade internally in the school district before even actually doing anything else. So,
correct.
Thank you.
Do you just want to follow on what Michael's question was?
Yeah,
or
just
comment?
really quick about competencies and homework. What other districts do is, if you're a student that does not do homework, chooses not to do it, and has a competency low, the school district will likely not allow for remediation. However, if you do homework to show that you're putting the effort behind it, that's like the trigger to allow remediation to occur. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to make clear that that's one, and that's a policy that's clearly written in their manual, right? So that's why I'm saying that there's, are we supposed to be helping to remediate? Absolutely. But I think that the fact that an effort is being made proves to the teacher that they're a student for remediation. I want to make sure that I'm clear about.
So I just want to follow up on that. I find that that's actually something that we should not do either, because let's say a student gets a 95 on a test and someone else gets an 80 but has done homework. The 95 person doesn't do homework. Should that person, because they missed out on 5%, not be able to do?
But they don't get remediation to equivalent. The bottom line
not
is
equivalent, but they still have that opportunity to get remediation. So therefore, everybody should have that ability to get a remediation.
I'm just, in my research, finding districts that didn't grade homework.
And I'm just saying that I don't agree with it. That's all.
I'm just telling you the way that other districts choose to do it. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that's an approach you could take to replace grading.
No. And just to follow off on that, I think that when I'm hearing about competency grading, it's about getting the student competent. So if, the student is looking to make an effort, do we give them that opportunity to get competent, even if they haven't shown, the homework, or if they haven't shown it in testing? If they're making efforts to try to become competent, do we turn that child away? So I think that's discussion that may not be part of this protocol, but definitely.
This is very, it's very excellent,
it.
very helpful dialogue. What I would just say in reference to the last few minutes is that I think that we can't necessarily make an overt assumption that if a student doesn't do their homework, that they're not motivated, and that they aren't therefore allowed the chance to remediate. There are currently in Merrimack a number of teachers who will not allow remediation if you haven't demonstrated that you've done your homework. And then there are others who allow it, even if you haven't. But one of the things that we've realized is that there are lots and lots of ways that students learn. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all. And sometimes for lack of a better word, the aha moment comes at times that aren't predictable. And they don't necessarily fall into the 4 quarters that school systems put learning into. So we have benchmarks and say, well, generally by now you should know this, and by now you should know this, and so on and so forth. And then we have a student who's just got a normal brain who is going to need to maybe have until the next quarter before that really comes in. And so what we are attempting to do, and this is sort of related to this issue, but it's a little bit broader, but we're trying to do is to say there are lots of reasons that a student's understanding eventually kicks in, and it's important to provide multiple opportunities for that to be demonstrated. And where we're struggling right now is because, not just in Merrimack, but we have these benchmarks. November is the first report card. We have to report, and so if that reporting mechanism and schedule isn't consistent with how a student learns, it makes it a little bit challenging because we're talking about two different things. And so what we're trying to create is an environment where if a student has a rough start to a semester because of a variety of personal or social or financial or family things, and has grades that reflect that, but then at another point later in the semester kick in for whatever reason, life's turned around and they can now do stuff. We don't want what they were struggling with to drag them back. So the 30s and the 50s and the 60s on quizzes suddenly, become the thing that drags an average down when the way you ended the semester is you really know what to do. And so why should the fact that you didn't used to know what to do drag you back, because now you ended the semester and you should? That's what competencies are all about. Much the same way that in a driver's ed test, you don't, you take the test until you pass the test. You're not denied a license at a certain point if the average of your 3 driver's tests is X. You can perform it or you can't perform it. And so we as a collective have to decide, what's the right time to draw the curtain and say, now you have to show us what you know. And that's talk about a big conversation. I mean, that's a bigger conversation. But as relates to homework, I wouldn't draw the necessarily parallel that not doing homework means one's not motivated and therefore shouldn't be allowed to demonstrate what they now know, which they didn't before. Because homework is a tool that we provide a student to demonstrate, to be able to practice, to work through something. And the fact that a student might not take the opportunity to do that might be for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with motivation, and yet they're held back average-wise because they just didn't comply with the behavior. That's why it's very tricky to combine behaviors with academic understanding. I'm not suggesting it's easy, but it's that the fix is easy, but in fact, just quite the opposite. I'm trying to demonstrate that it's very complicated. But the too quick jumping to motivation for why one does or doesn't do something, when now we're talking about a grade, really becomes problematic, particularly if you're trying to implement a policy that's, and by policy I mean policy, a policy district-wide like the homework policy, which says it's a tool. And sometimes you use a tool and sometimes you don't use a tool. And so it's just something we need to...
Yeah, I agree. And just to close this thought out is that I agree that it's a stake in the ground. It's the same way that in contracts we look at different districts. What's the workforce reduction criteria for teachers when you have to do budget cuts? Every district does it different. But when a district is struggling to come up with a rationale for not grading homework, they come up with different methodologies. And what I was explaining was an example of what was done, because right now we as a district are struggling to give the kids a reason to do homework, except that it helps with their rigor should they need it, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. If you look at all this stuff that we've heard, the fundamental reason behind wanting the kids to get into the rigor of doing homework is so that they can learn the materials, be able to practice, be able to be ready. But as you saw from the teachers' responses, it seems to be having the opposite effect in some cases. So I, as a board member, say, what can we do to help make it clear to everyone what some of the advantages would be to do homework? Competency and remediation is just one, and it's what another district has done, and they've been relatively successful.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay.
It was Naomi's turn, but we'll give it to her now. So, Naomi, go ahead.
I did not mind waiting. That was very interesting to listen to. I just wanted to pop one last other thought into this. I don't have children in the district, but what I do during the day is I teach higher education at the college level. And I think it's important to balance the extraordinarily important getting into and funding college with what's been brought up, which is the performance there, because one of the most difficult things I encounter professionally is repeatedly students who arrive with A's and B's and hit the classroom, and that's not the level that they're going to be functioning at the college level. And they hit this really difficult, personally difficult, challenging moment when they have to face the fact that what they thought they were prepared to do, they're simply not prepared to do. And then we begin to work through our higher education process of remediation, which is its own piece. And so I think those two have to reflect each other in some way. Otherwise, a student may move on to the next level of their career training, but we've lied to them about what they're ready to do. So it's that balancing act between those two pieces. And that's why I like this conversation, because we have to talk about all those as we balance the policy. So.
Protocol. There you go. So, Chris, did you have your hand up again? I wasn't sure. Okay, just make sure. So, on that note, anything else? Because we really have had a very healthy discussion. And you've been at the front and center of it, so we thank you for taking it all on.
I appreciate your time.
Yep, and I do see this is the conversation that will continue. I think it's the first year. You know, I think we need another semester under our belts based on what you've learned the first semester, your studies, the refinements, the adjustments, the feedback, the second semester. I think we'll just keep the conversation going and let us know how things are going with that. I know that I definitely liked Mike's question about department heads, and obviously not all districts have the same level of department head, but how the protocol has impacted students' recorded performance is definitely something that we want to look at because, you know, for all the reasons we're talking about, and of course for even the younger grades, you know, where we need to do some more intervention. And I like the fact we are going to do competencies at the lower grades because, again, for the same reason, we know where we need to intervene and where we need to extend. Michael?
Just for clarification, what you're saying is a very valid point, and I think that's very useful. What I'm looking for is that teachers actually give out like what the breakdown is: 40% test, 20% this, and I think that should be shared at the department level, reviewed and authorized almost at this point, because there does have to be some consistency, and I think there's some inconsistency in what students are actually getting versus what the protocol is. Thank you.
We didn't bring a lot of cash on tonight, so we had to be sorry.
Can I assume
Sure.
that the board would like me to post the results?
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
Transparency is our thing. So we are actually on to item number 4, which is the review outcome from Budget Committee's public hearing and work session. So we are aware that the Budget Committee has reviewed the warrant articles, has reviewed the budget, and has come up with an adjusted number for the budget. And it is $6,000 more than what we put out at our vote. And Naomi, if you'd like to kind of just explain where we're at, and I think we also have some information in our packets about how that came to be as well.
The information in the packet is nicely comprehensive. One of the members of the Budget Committee requested and brought this forward with a breakdown of a $6,000 addition that would be intended to go towards training, safety training in the schools. She had specific trainings in mind for the school resource officers, the ALICE training and other ones of that sort. I abstained because I didn't know what we thought as a group. I liked the idea. I had other questions that I wanted to ask that had to do with whether funding exists already in certain ways, what has been tried, what might be paid for by the town, and so forth. But it's become very timely all of a sudden, hasn't it, that monies be available for this kind of a piece. There's not much to add on top of the idea that it's $6,000 to be divided between 2 school resource officers with the intention of funding their participation in trainings.
Okay, thank you. So there's a couple housekeeping items. First, about an hour and 55 minutes ago, I probably should have mentioned that Board Member Gualiumi is excused from tonight's meeting. I've never, ever done it right the first time. But on that note, so she is absolutely excused, and we will see her at the next meeting. But then we have some work to do, and we need to reconsider the operating budget on the Budget Committee's modification, because that we need to prepare for our warrant. So with that, our new operating budget has gone up by $6,000, and the number is now, and I'm going to put Matt on the spot.
The total number on warrant article number 9, which is your operating budget, is $6,000 higher, or $74,817,416.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure if that was the Budget Committee's number or our number.
That is the Budget Committee's number.
Thank you very much. So we're going to have to, since the Budget Committee was the last to actually vote on it, we now have to vote. Let's take a new vote for our position. Andy knows, you guys know. So I will let Andy take the mic because he wants it so bad.
No, I just was going to. I want to talk, but
Okay.
I want to go through the proper. So
Absolutely.
I move that we retake the vote on Article 9 with the new revised number of $74,817,416 as an operating budget, with the default budget being the same.
Is there a second? Seconded by Naomi. So would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes.
Okay.
So obviously the Budget Committee voted on Article 9 with the higher amount. They voted 801 to recommend that item. Should we, regardless of how we as a board feel about whether the $6,000 gets funded or not by our entity or not, if we disagree with this, it means that we do not recommend the operating budget minus $6,000. So my intent is to certainly vote in support of this modified operating budget to make sure that we get the message across. Personally, however, when I heard about the addition of $6,000, it reminded me of the days gone by when I was on the Budget Committee, when people would bring items to the Budget Committee that the school board had never heard of before and add it to the bottom line without any sort of a vetting at the school board level as to whether, in this case, whether the funding for the school resource officers to do this training, what body it comes out of, whether it's the town body or the school body, whether it's appropriate. I mean, you're absolutely right, because this funding is for the school resource officers to take training for things like lockdowns and shooting scenarios like this. I think there's certainly value to it. I think that we are going to have conversations with the town council as to where the funding comes from for this. But I think just to be able to make this simple, I would be in support of modifying the operating budget just to pick this up at this point, and then we'll discuss the implementation after the vote.
Michael?
So I think I agree with Co-Chair Schneider, where my concern is that I'm in favor of passing the amended budget just so that it shows that we are presenting the approval for the budget. However, in my learnings working with the administration, I would say that this is not the right procedure in order to add money like this without actually speaking to the administration first and actually understanding if there's a different means of funding this, if this is something that either the administration is already looking into. So I will say that I believe in the intent in this. I actually feel that it is something that is very beneficial to the community. The only thing that I'm against is that the way that it actually was added to the budget. I know that I have had many ideas that I've talked to Marge, and I talked to the administration first about that idea to see if it's something that's on their radar or if it's something that's valuable and stuff like that. So I would just emphasize that I think the administration is always open to speaking, and this board is always open to listening to the public and ideas of how to better the school district. I would prefer have this come up a little before so that it could actually be part of the budget process. So, but I will be voting in favor. Thank you.
Okay. And I agree with all that was said. Honestly, when it comes to $6,000 for police training, we haven't asked the police department if they're able to release those officers for training, so we don't oversee that the personnel to which we are funding in theory with this money. So I mean, we are very fortunate. I don't think everyone's as fortunate as us, but we have a very strong and collaborative relationship for many years with the Merrimack Police Department. I don't if they needed us to fund it, I expected they would have come to us to fund it versus going to their own entity that oversees them, which is the town council. But in the same token, I do appreciate the source of training that they're asking for. I think safety is something that we as a board have considered paramount to our responsibilities, and so the spirit in which it's the money's being asked for, I think goes along with the culture in which we operate the board and operate the district, which is student safety is one of the most important things we deal with every day in and day out. And it's so I also will be supporting it for those reasons, and we will kind of go from there. Naomi, I didn't say Cindy.
I could pretend. No, I wanted to make clear from what I was saying before. I think that it's wonderful that it's being looked at and that people have it on their minds and are thinking about ways to enhance that. I share very much what was said. This was my first time on the budget committee where this occurred. And so it was very interesting for me to sit through it and see what happened and what my role was in relation to it as well. But it was certainly very sincere. And there was intent also, and some attempt to also work within what was known of the system, I think, to check and see whether or not the authors might be released and so forth. I think that there was an attempt to build that in as well, and I'd want that to be reflected. I would have liked more context earlier so that I would have had a more informed vote. Yeah.
Thank you. So there's a motion on the floor to accept the budget as amended by the Budget Committee. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 4-0-0. And onward. And yes, Andy.
Are you continuing to talk about this agenda topic? Or are you moving along?
Well, that's really the only adjustment we need to make on the agenda topic, I think. So reconsider operating budget based on and review outcome of the public hearing and work session. So I believe all the warrants also went forward as presented, other than the $6,000 here.
They did, but I guess are you up for an observation from the meeting?
We could, sure. I think this is about the right time. Go ahead.
Well, it actually segues into your next topic, which is the warrant presentations for deliberative session.
Okay.
There was some discussion at an earlier budget committee meeting about the specifics of article number 7, which was the Brentwood property and the purchase for the proposed purchase and sales, $275,000. There were a lot of questions about what was going to be done to the land, and specifically what's the cost going to be, what's the design of the building going to be, and things like that. Because the intent of the school board is obviously to procure this property with the intent of eyeing the ultimate resolution of the SAU SPED building sort of housing location. The discussion at the budget committee meeting was kind of eye-opening in the fact that that there's a myriad of different ideas on what, if we get this property, how we should go about resolving it. Between bulldozing it down, between doing a complete rebuild, between doing a little bit here, a little bit there. There's a lot of different viewpoints on that. And I think that the only point of view that we've looked at is retooling the building. That's the potential thing we've looked at. We haven't looked at what it would cost to rebuild from scratch. We haven't looked like it would cost if we did it more in a piecemeal fashion or things like that. There's a lot of different options on the table. So my observation is that while the budget committee approved it 7-2-0, the 2 no votes were because they were trying to include what you're going to do with the building. And I think the important part is that what we need to do is emphasize the fact that the first step is procuring the land and the property, and that we can't even really have a good multi-faceted discussion. And by multifaceted, I mean school district, town, student, parents, contractors, everything, about exactly the right approach to resolve the building, whether you add on or tear down or whatever. So I think what we need to do, my recommendation is that we talk about this and promote this concept. We really promote the one-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get this property, and then that we will work in good faith with the community to figure out the best approach to take to be able to make this building. That's the observation I took from that discussion, because it was probably the most contentious of everything that was discussed at the table that night, at least when I was there. So, and by the way, just so you know, I was allowed during the public hearing aspect to talk as a resident and a member of the school board as to what the intent was behind this. So that's the opportunity that I had. So
Thank you. Was there any other? Okay, thank you. So yeah, I think that's important for us to reiterate that when you're talking about the intent of the building to do an RFP or an RFQ for what we would call a repurposing of a building from one to another with two different functions for our district, it's premature to do that when we don't own the property. So with that, this is the first and most important step because this property is up for sale. This property is a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to get a piece of property that has the square footage that we need, contiguous with the rest of our campus at the high school, and in such close proximity to our upper elementary, elementary, and even really close to the middle school. It's only a mile down the road. So with that, we really are. It's a sweet spot to accomplish this goal, and can do it again without starting from the level land, which means that we have opportunity to really achieve savings. So on that note, I think that this is the first of many conversations we have to have up to the deliberative session, after the deliberative session, and at the at voting day. So on that note, thank you for bringing that up. And I definitely think there's more to come. And on to item number 5, so you segued me nicely, thank you, Andy, which is warrant presentations. And I had put together a draft of what I considered the obvious choices for warrant presentations. The first, and we'll go through each one. And so the goal is to have gifts and property presented by Mike and seconded by Andy. The MESA contract I will present, and Naomi as the second seat at negotiations will second. Me as first seat will move. The contract trailer, Naomi as second seat will move. I will second. The repair capital reserve fund, I had Cinda earmarked for that, with Andy seconding. The pavement reconstruction at Thornton's Ferry, Mike, since you made the personal field trip, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to get that going, with Cinda seconding. The purchase of Brentwood, Andy as the Planning and Building Committee liaison. I feel that was a no-brainer for you, and your words tonight just reiterated that good decision. I will second for you as someone who also served on that committee back in the day. And then full-day kindergarten, I had Naomi with Cinda seconding, because Naomi has served on the task force for full-day kindergarten with the district as both a resident expert in the field and as our school board liaison. So it was a very good fit. The budget committee does bring forth the school district operating budget, and the chair is Stan Heinrich, so he will do so at deliberative session, with, I believe, his appointed second probably being the vice chair. So with that, are there any questions on the assignments? Excellent. So I will ask Marge if you could have this sent to Lynn Christensen as our moderator, so she can prepare for our deliberative session on March 8th, which is a Thursday night, and we will be ready to go. We're on to item number 6, which is the proposed school calendar for 2018-2019, and I turn the mic over to Marge.
Thank you. So I want to just, before I review the dates, the proposed dates, I want you to know that in your packet you also have a communication from the Merrimack Education Support Staff Association. By contract, they're able to weigh in on what they'd offer for a possible calendar. We also had a parent send us a copy of the Jewish holidays for next year. You need to know that I went forward and got a copy of a mass school calendar, because you remember once upon a time we had the same vacation weeks, and that just did not go well. So we always get a copy of Newton or a school in Massachusetts. I also made judgment on previous requests based on parent surveys that have been conducted. I would tell you that the Merrimack Teachers Association also has the opportunity, but in this particular case, they did not submit any documentation. The leadership team has also reviewed this calendar. As you know, conducting an August Academy is very important for our educators, as well as the multitude multitude of parents say that they prefer their children to start school after Labor Day if we look at surveys in total. So we have the last week of August, from August 27th to August 31st, for educators to do work in their classroom, to attend an August Academy, and to be with their respective building principal in building meetings. So then school would start on the first day after Labor Day. Labor Day is September 3rd. The first day of school would be September 4th. Moving down into October, we have learned that Columbus Day is also important for parents. That's Monday, October 8th. One legal holiday that we must observe is Veterans Day. If Veterans Day falls on a Saturday or Sunday, you use the respective Friday or Monday. So in this case, where it falls on Sunday, we would observe it on Monday, November 12th. When you look at Thanksgiving, I would say the, again, most important day for educators and also for many parents is the 3-day Thanksgiving holiday because of traveling. So if that were to be true, it would be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, November 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. Moving down into Christmas time and the holiday recess, that would be Monday, December 24th to Tuesday, January 1st. And likewise in January, we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day. That is Monday, January 21st. Moving over into February, the winter recess next year would be Monday, February 25th to Friday, March 1st. Moving to spring recess, that would be the 4th week of April, which would be Monday, April 22nd to Friday, April 26th. And another legal holiday that we must observe is Memorial Day, which next year would occur on Monday, May 27th. If we had no inclement weather days, the last day of school would be June 14th. And you'll note then that I've put in the accompanying makeup days. So I put it forward for your consideration, realizing that there are some steps that need to be taken between now and the final approval of the school calendar.
Andy?
So just to make sure I'm clear, that it's only every 4 years at the presidential election that we look at closing the schools down on Election Day?
Correct.
Okay.
Were there any other questions? Seeing none, the one thing that we try to do every year when the calendar comes out, we take a look at this. We do a survey. We've gotten great results since we've gone the electronic way, and we hope to do the same. I know that we'll keep some of the same standard answers we had last year, but a couple of weeks ago we did get testimony about blizzard bags, and the question is, do we want to know some of those foundation questions that gave us concerns? So questions in the vein of, students' access to technology to be able to do work, students, if students are at home and they are home with a snow day, how many students have access to how many pieces of technology at home versus daycare? So are there places to work, resources for them, those kind of things. So, for us, at least having that foundation research will tell us what kind of, if for any reason we ever do want to explore blizzard bags, we actually know what the data is that would help us to formulate an informed decision. And really that's what I'm looking at it for, is data. But it's a good exercise for us to get that kind of data point question as well. I know that we talked about blizzard bags again, and is that where the board wants to go? I didn't hear a resounding yes to that from our dialogue. But as questions come up, at least we vetted those answers. And I think that's still a valuable exercise as well. So just keeping that information coming so that we can always make data-driven decisions is always important. So having those questions in, we'll look to add those just to know where we're at. Were there any questions regarding how the calendar would be impacted that we wanted to add to that specific survey? From a theoretical standpoint, obviously. Michael?
So just for clarification, you're going to put questions around Blizzard Bag into this survey, or is that going to be separate?
Technology surveys. So
to basically allow for some of the answers to those questions that
correct.
we're setting up. Yeah, appreciate that. That's
so I think they're good to have as a board as well. I think they could actually feed us in many ways.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I'm very interested in the continuing conversation. I'm not one way or another with the Blizzard Bags, but I think it would be very good to continue that. Thank
Absolutely.
You.
And I think when you talk about our dialogue from earlier tonight, when Mark was talking about, access to resources to be able to do outside of classroom classwork, this data could possibly just extend to other areas of our district operations. So it may come from one place, but it can go to others. Michael?
If possible, since we're talking about technology in the survey for the parents, if it's possible to also associate the possible impact to the school district. I'm not sure if we can get a estimate or something like that of items that might need to address on the technology side when we get all those answers back, so that they're one, since they're associated together. So what teachers would need and what we'd have to provide them and stuff like that for technology in order to do it also. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think one of the things that needs to happen is the Blizzard Bag outcome is really going to be separate from the school calendar, and we've got people asking to have the school calendar approved as soon as possible so that people can make plans. So I think if I'm just trying to say that the outcome is going to be segmented, so we'll take those technology answers, put them over here along with other things that need to be done, and hopefully go forward and just see how the school calendar looks, because they're really two separate entities, and we've got a lot of work to do if the board wants to go in the direction of Blizzard Bags. I mean,
I absolutely agree. I'm not asking for the technology answers to be with the calendar. I'm just asking for the other information to be lumped together when it comes forward. Thank you.
Okay. And on that note, we know we're leading up to the last week before this year's winter break. So putting a survey out this week would, we can develop it this week, but putting it out this week or next week seems counterproductive to response rates. So the goal is if we can get it out by March 5th or 6th. So, and have that out to the parents of the district in a timely fashion. Gives us a week to take the data in, and then a week to compile the data and present it as we make our final decision, hopefully at our meeting on March 19th, which will give parents, then they can start planning their family activities. So if that makes sense, we'll keep it going on the agenda until such time as it's finalized. Excellent. So if there's nothing else, we will go on to housekeeping. This is very exciting. So the approval of the February 1st, 2018 non-public minutes. Michael?
I move that we approve the February 1st non-public and February 5th public meeting minutes as presented. Or is that?
Can we do one at a time for Rose's sake?
I'm sorry?
Can we do one at a time for Rose's sake?
Sure,
so
absolutely.
Can we do
So
the first?
I move that we approve the February 1st, 2018 non-public meeting minutes.
Seconded by Naomi. We'll put the motion to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None. The motion carries 4-0-0. Practicing my fours tonight. And then I'll let you keep going, Michael.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from the February 5th, 2018 public meeting.
Is there a second? Seconded by Naomi. Are there any edits to those minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? None. The motion carries 4-0-0. On to item number 8, which is the consent agenda with Mark.
On consent tonight, we have the following. Approval of trends in international mathematics and science study. That's popularly known as TIMSS survey for grade 8.
So is there a motion? Andy?
I move that we accept the consent agenda as read, specifically the approval of the surveys that were presented at the last meeting.
Survey. One of the two was recommended.
They were both presented, but we're approving one. That's correct.
Correct. Thank you. Sorry. Is there a second? Seconded by Michael. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? 1. And so the motion carries 3-1-0. And then we're on to item number 9, which is,
I'd just like to add a comment since.
Okay,
before
it's consent, so it can't be
consent,
passed.
we
Okay,
said?
that's fine. So we can't deliberate on consent, so, sorry. We're on to item number 9, which is other correspondence. Is there any correspondence to come before the board? Chris, and I think Naomi. Oh, okay, well, we'll start with Chris.
All right, so I have 2 more people who texted me about the school board, the homework policy. 1 for and 1 against.
Well, we're keeping it levelized. Okay, let's see. Oh, the other side of the table. So I will let Marge go.
Thank you. At your place was a letter that was sent from the Department of Education to John Fabrizio, the Director of Student Services. And I wanted to point this out because it speaks to Indicator 11, which is timeliness of initial evaluations in the 2016-2017 reporting year. Merrimack received 100% in compliance. And the letter also points out that this was so in 15-16, 14-15, and 13-14. So the Merrimack School District is known for its compliance in these areas, and I want you to see the correspondence.
Thank you, Marge. Michael?
I stated this earlier, but in regards to the homework discussion, I had numerous people reach out to me in regards to that discussion and share their thoughts.
Thank you. Cinda emailed as well that she got 2 parent emails regarding school security concerns. I also was copied on one that went to administration. So administration responded to that constituent about questions on school safety. And that covers it. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. And there was one for election process. So want to know what the process was for an SB2 because they were new to town. So that's all I had. So no other correspondence? Comments? Are there any comments? Marge and Matt? I see a couple fingers flashing.
I'm going to ask Matt to respond because he has the answer to Jenna's question.
Thank you.
Well, I have a answer. I don't have all the answers. I have an answer. We haven't really talked about this at the board level because it's primarily an administrative function. But we have been meeting, 3 of the 6 schools have already completed an in-depth security assessment by Scott Lambertson of the New Hampshire Department of Homeland Security, the Emergency Management Division, where we meet with the high school principal, assistant principal. We've met with both school resource officers. Scott goes through and walks through the entire school with myself, Tom Tussaud, and those other individuals, and he does a full security assessment for us. He talks about some of the items that we are doing good. We're in good shape. You know, when the general comments come on board, he likes our airlock style entrances that we do have. There's a lot of schools that don't have those types of entrances, that a lot of schools in this immediate area leave all their exterior doors unlocked during the day. Once everything is in there and the kids are in, all the exterior doors are locked with the exception of that one entrance. So we have, it's a minimum of around 4 hours, so you spend a lot of time with Scott walking around looking at every single thing you possibly can. He makes recommendations. He will file a formal report that we're not going to make public because it has a lot of sensitive information in it. But, however, it'll be something that we can build off of for future budgets. He likes what we're doing with the security cameras. That's a big deal to him. The entrances are a big deal to him. The wearing of badges and proper identification is certainly a big deal. The culture that we have as far as the staff goes, when they see something that doesn't look right, they report it right away. If I'm walking around one of the buildings and I don't have my badge on and there's somebody who doesn't recognize who I am, they'll stop me and they'll ask me who I am. No one is shy. People in your building are your best security advocates for you, and we have always fostered a culture of don't be shy. If you don't know them, stop them, ask them what they're doing, to see a visitor's pass. At the high school, we have a system where you actually key in your name and everything like that, and it prints out a visitor's pass, and everybody at all the schools get a visitor's pass, including those who are frequent subcontractors of ours, like Honeywell is always in our building, so they always display their badges. There was one day where the Honeywell gentleman did not display his badge properly. He was out in the back of Mastrocola Elementary School, and he was met with the Merrimack Police Department, among a few others, in right fashion very quickly. So we do watch that. The teachers watch it. They're our biggest assets, the paras, the custodians who see what's going on out there and report immediately. So I just want to let you know that 3 of the schools are done, and then there's 3 more to be done probably by around mid-March, and we'll have all that information. We also have submitted to the State Department of Ed our emergency plans. They've all been submitted as far as the end of August. Everything's updated. They're around 150 pages long each. It's kind of the Bible, using their standard protocol. They still need to be fleshed out in certain areas, and we're going to work on those every single year. And every classroom and every space that we have, not just a classroom, but if it's the Merrimack High School conference room, there's a flip chart there. Because when you're in an emergency type situation, you're not going to reach for a 153-page manual. You're going to reach for an easy flip chart. It's red on the front. You pull it down. It tells you what to do in case of lockdown, in case of shelter in place, in case of fire alarms, in case of whatever. It's real easy. It's in every single space where kids are. It's even in central office. When you walk in the door, you look right, it's pinned right there. So that's something that people can grab and go right away. So there's been a lot of emergency planning in this district over the course of the years. I've been present for most of it, as the superintendent. And we've worked closely with the Merrimack Police Department, and now we're working very closely with the Department of Homeland Security. So I hope that kind of gives people a little sense of security, that we're just not sitting here not doing anything. We're doing a whole heck of a lot.
Excellent. Andy?
I'd also like to, you didn't mention this, but I remember a few years ago we received grants to be part of what was it called, COP 911, but essentially what it is, it's the panic button approach that every teacher has in their rooms, that they can issue an emergency, and if they don't hit I hit this button wrong within 15 seconds, I think it is, every police officer from within a 10-mile radius comes straight to the school. So I think it's important that we remember that has been in place for several years in the district.
But one of the main things that Scott did mention, not to get in a conversation on this, was that this doesn't happen too often. And he was very surprised by it, that every office has a standard issue Merrimack Police radio. It's just not a radio that has their frequency, it's one of their radios. And there's a red button on the top of that, and all you have to do is hit that red button and do nothing else, and the cavalry will come to your location because they know which radio is where. So for expediency and for something that needs to get done right away, he was very surprised that the police were willing to give us their radios on their frequencies with the ability to just hit one button and they immediately know there's an issue in a particular location. So another piece of information.
Thank you. Marge?
The only thing I was going to point out, I don't think Matt said it, and he was the one that wrote the grant, was that we did get notification that we got a portion of our cameras, our new cameras, through a grant. And those cameras are for the middle school and high school. And so that's just an ongoing effort. But we were just notified that that's going to be forthcoming. So I think that's a positive piece, too.
Yeah, that's one thing I want to sit down after we get the reports from Scott and sit down with the principals and Tom Tussaud. I don't think we're looking to give this money back to the taxpayers. I think security cameras are very important, so we'd be looking to spend the grant money, which was approximately 80% of the $47,000 we had in the budget, and look to see which areas we need to fill in. So we'll be coming back with a plan.
Thank you. Michael?
Just wanted to comment on a couple things. One was in regards to the approval of trends in international mathematics and science study. I just wanted to say that I voted against it because I was not in favor of some of the wording that was on the questionnaire, just if anybody asks why. Additionally, I do want to say that I did actually go to JMU's and check out the repair of the building. It was very impressive. I was not able to actually tell the difference between the bricks, the old ones and the new ones. The only way I could actually tell what area was actually done was with the caulking that was actually on the building. So did a great job. And just to help with Matt's point that he just did regarding security, at both points when I reviewed JMU's and the Thornton's Ferry, I was approached several times by the teachers to ask what I was doing there. So thank you.
Thank you. So, and I actually have one more piece of correspondence because it's under my packet, so I forgot about it. I just got, as we got here tonight, it's just an organization that has an event coming up that they invited the board to, and I'll share you the details on if you're interested in going. So, on to, any more comments before I go? Okay. New business? Is there any new business to come before the board? Right, seeing none. Committee reports from the board. Andy?
So it was a busy day on the 12th of February. First, we had the Ceres Board of Directors meeting, where I believe we're like within spitting distance of new, oh God, I always forget what those things are called. Bylaws, thank you. I would say Bill of Rights, that's not the right answer. But the new bylaws for what Ceres is going to do. We started talking more in detail about some of the programs that they're going to offer in the coming year, as well as some of the ideas of what they want to do. So I know that Marge put together some of the things that we're using Ceres for today and where the opportunities might be. So a lot of work with Ceres on what they're going to be offering next year, more of the getting back to the basics things were done in that one. And then afterwards, immediately went to a Planning and Building Committee meeting, which did not have quorum, so it was a Planning and Building chat where I essentially let them know the approach we're going to take with the Brentwood. It was the first time that the Planning and Building Committee had gotten together since the Brentwood. We had gotten sort of the purchase and sales and the warrant. We had proposed the warrant article. So we had some discussions about it, a lot of questions about the cost and the approach, and that bled over into the next night into the, actually it was a week later, that was right, I think it was. I'm trying to remember. Was it? No, it was the next night. It's all blends together. The next night, where we talked about the same thing, which is where we came to the realization that we have to separate the purchase of the land and property from what the building is going to be because there's too many unknowns. So that was there. And then there also was a wellness committee meeting that I was not able to attend. Actually, I don't even know if they had it. There was a lot of that were not able to attend. I don't remember. I'll find out for sure. But I know it had to be rescheduled 2 or 3 times. So anyway.
Okay. Well, we had a healthcare cost containment committee snowed out from a snow day, so I have nothing. So, Mike?
My professional development unit was snowed out because of the snow day.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Theme I don't want to keep repeating. And then Naomi.
Obviously, the budget committee has been meeting. If there are any other questions or things people want me to share, feel free to ask away.
Thank you. You do, Chris. Bring it.
The robotics team is going to competitions on March 9th and 10th and March 29th to March 31st.
Excellent. And actually, Chris, I believe you were in the solo and group ensemble in
Yes,
Durham.
I was also in that.
Yes, so the band did a wonderful job. I know there were group solos and groups, 44 presentations. 42 presentations of pieces by our musical students, in which one of our, I recognized one of our presenters tonight because she played both flute and saxophone and soprano saxophone, and
I believe she had 12 different pieces she played.
So quite the aggressive game plan. So I hope she's watching at home. But you guys, I saw the parent night, and they were doing a beautiful job. So kudos to the music program as well. So we're on to item number 12, which is public comments on agenda items. If anyone from the public would like to speak, please state your name and address for the record. And
well, since I stuck it out to the bitter end. Again, Jenna Hardy, 59 Peasley Road in Merrimack. First of all, I just want to say thank you. This is the first time I've done this. And I think you guys are fabulous. I think you asked thoughtful questions and you made thoughtful comments. Mark, I thought your presentation on the homework protocol was excellent. I'm an educator by trade, although not practicing because I'm home with kids. But I thought it was fabulous, and as my postscript, I'm in complete agreement with the things that you said and the questions you guys asked, and many of the things you said was just really excellent. I was super impressed. And I just want to thank Matt for the information about the security. Even that few bits of information helped me as a parent to understand and feel more confident about my child being safe at school, so that I can intelligently speak to that with other parents and help ease their concerns and all of that. So I thank you for that work that you do, because it seems like it's above and beyond so much of what other districts are doing. And again, next year I will have 4 kids in 4 different schools in this district. So I can't say enough about how thankful I am for the work that you do and for the consistent and constant sort of review of that process that you're constantly doing, and that you're really getting the top level of people involved. And anything that, I just want to state for the record that anything that those of us, that parents, if you need parent support and things that people can do to help, I'm just a phone call away. You now have my address on record. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenna. And we wouldn't have charged you $1 if you said policy, if it makes you feel any better. Are there any other public comments? Good
evening. Well, let's see. Can you hear me now? There we go. This better. Okay. Good evening. My name is Robert Bevel. I live at 12 Blair Road. Last time we spoke, we talked about Education 306.14 as it relates to the homework policy versus the protocol, and that it required by law that each school have its own instructional program. The board was supposed to go and research that to see where the board was on that and what policies you were going to implement. Was that ever carried forward or followed up with?
Public comments are for testimony. They're not for dialogue, unfortunately, Mr. Bevel.
Okay, all right. Well, then I will comment that I've not heard anything back on this, and that we've danced around the policy versus protocol. I found it very interesting that the survey was announced by voicemail, but not everybody got the email. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for providing the link on that. Since it was a non-scientific study, it's, as Dr. McLaughlin said, numbers are numbers, and people participated. However, I found it interesting that the teachers had a closed forum from which to make their observations, and I heard an overarching opinion from the teachers that they wanted to see the homework count. And Dr. McLaughlin said that he felt like it was a poor communication on his part to them as to how that was to be implemented. For the record, I am against the homework protocol as it is right now. This debate has been set in a certain paradigm from the beginning, that homework is a boost, or that it is something extra in the grading of our students. And I think that's a wrong paradigm to set, because once you've set that, it makes it sound like our students are cheating or getting something extra that other students are not getting. Quite the contrary. Almost all other school districts have some kind of merit system of the homework counting towards the cumulative grade. It is us now that will be putting a detriment to those 3 young people who were sitting here that are college bound, and also for some of my kids with the IEPs that are going to be affected by this, because the formative assessments, the ability to track them doing a little better, has no count. It has no value. Yes, the charter, the policy says that we value homework, but the protocol that has been implemented says just the opposite. If we're not going to grade it, it doesn't count. I see the homework protocol being a campaign issue for those running for school board next time, because I think I've only heard Michael and Andy really come out in where they stand on it. They've been quite good in talking about both sides, but I feel very confident where they stand. I am concerned that this was ill-conceived, poorly rolled out. We had to have a debate about it in November. We were told we would get to talk about it in January again. It's almost the end of February. We've done a survey which, if you looked at the survey, the questions asked not necessarily what the scope of homework protocol was about. It was, did you understand the protocol? Did you understand where it was going to be? How do you feel about it? The question should have been more, how much value is graded homework to you versus not graded? How much value is it to you for available time for your student, less than the rudimentary skills, as one of the young men said, the learning of the skill set that you need to get into college? What value is there of that implementation of the programs and the homework? Again, one of the things that keeps being missed in this debate is no one has eliminated homework. We have eliminated homework grades, and in many cases, we have eliminated the review and the pass back of the homework. And if the kids, like you had said earlier, Michael, if the kids are not getting a chance to look at what they're making a mistake on and it's handed back to get it right, then we don't need homework. But that's not what we're doing here. We are just not grading homework. And I believe that we need to have homework count to some level of the cumulative grade for these college-bound and IEP students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bevel. Is there any more public comment on agenda items?
Can I say something else?
You can, absolutely. It's still open.
150% participation.
I'm getting 150% participation again. He's doing
I
the
swear
best.
to God, I won't come every time and do this, I promise. But I want to say something because as an educator and as a parent, I have a unique perspective, even though I'm not currently teaching. As an educator, what I did see when kids did homework is I saw exactly what Mr. McLaughlin talked about. The kids that did not have the support at home either did not complete their homework or it was kind of for a non-professional term, a hot mess. You know, it was what it was. And it didn't often do them a whole lot of good. The kids that had all of the support and then some at home got all their homework done, got it all turned in, and got it turned in with impeccable grades. Some of them, I would say their parents got those impeccable grades, and I appreciated, Mr. McLaughlin, that you said that because it's true. It's true. I hear that I saw that as a teacher, and obviously I couldn't prove it then, but I can prove it as a parent because I literally have parents that will tell me they sit with their kid and they correct everything their kid does to make sure it's turned in perfectly. So not grading homework allows us to get, as you said, an accurate reflection of what a student's ability is and not what their parents' ability is and not what their support level is at home. And so I will just come out since I'm here and I don't know how clear I was just before. I am 100% in favor of this new homework policy because it does allow us to give an accurate reflection of what kids can do. And like you said, prevent the issue of when they get to college, them suddenly realizing they can't do what they thought they could do because homework gave their grade some sort of a boost or whatever. I don't know that I see that effect, but I will also say the effect I see in my own home, again, I have a preschooler, a 5th grader, a 6th grader, and a 9th grader. And what I'm seeing is my life is easier because we aren't buried in homework. I'm not having tears. I'm not having problems. I'm having family dinners where we can talk to each other. I'm able to take them to soccer without stress. Things like this. So the positive effects in my own personal family have been excellent, but professionally I think you guys really made the right call, and I think it was a courageous first step that most other districts aren't doing, but it is professional best practice as far as my research has shown me, and I think that other districts will follow our example once we work out the kinks, which are there, and like you admitted, and we will figure those out and move forward, and I think we'll end up being an example for other people in our state and maybe even in our country. Thank you.
Thank you. So if there's any other public comments on agenda items? Seeing none, I will close public comments. We'll take a moment to sign the manifest, and I will entertain a motion to go into non-public session per RSA 91-A:3, Roman numeral 2, sections A and L. Do I have a motion made by Andy, seconded by Michael? Naomi, how do you vote?
In favor?
Michael?
In favor?
Andy?
In favor.
And I vote in favor. The motion carries 4-0-0. Thank you and good night.